Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I've got multiple things going on, and I'm the simplest one in the problems this evening. So we should be giving a great congratulations or thank you for Matt and Lupita for getting us so that we're online right now. And those who can't make it to this evening are going to be able to hopefully enjoy this with us. We'd like to welcome you. We're glad you've made many miles of trip to get here. And for those who are new, I hope you find this enjoyable enough. We're all learning as we go. And I appreciate all the effort that's gone into it. There's some magnificent individuals that have put a lot of time in. I personally appreciate it. And I'm just the one responsible for standing in front of you. I apologize. What we'd like to do at the welcoming here is turn the time over right shortly here to Walt. Walt and I met each other many years ago, and he hosted me down in Kanab to present on a project I had begun a few years earlier, and finally got a little bit of information. And he says, come down and tell us a story. And I still remember the first question you ever asked me, and I'm still trying to answer that question. And that question was, why is it the red penstemons seem to hybridize with almost everything compared to many other penstemons? I still don't know the answer to that, Walt, but I do know that I have a similar anecdotal kind of series of evidence. So it's, it must help them with something somewhere in their evolution. Thanks for asking it. And it's, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'd like to turn the time over to Walt. Walt will present our presentation this evening. And then please bring out your pen and pencil. And when he starts explaining some things that we've written down, you remember we're a computer many miles apart. When we get here, everybody's saying, oh, but we have to worry about this, or we have to worry about that on the road. And we can't meet really until 8 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock or whatever. So get ready to make some amendments, because the papers are printed not as fast as the web. And the web is actually, I think, up to date. Is that correct, Matt? The web is actually up to date with things that have gone on this afternoon with changes. So be able to make some changes on the papers we've handed out. They get printed earlier.
You want to talk about that after?
We can talk about that after you present, and that way you can tell your story, and then you can get the eggs thrown at you. Please. You have that part. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I have one of those elephant voices where people close can't hear me, but people way in the back can. It's kind of a weird phenomenon. My name is Walter Fertig. I work here at Washington State University. I manage the Marion Ownbey Herbarium. Been doing that for almost 2 years. So I think I drove the least distance. I live about 3/4 of a mile from here. So thanks for everybody who came from all over. Appreciate you guys coming here. Michael asked me to talk about some of the penstemons of the Blue Mountains and greater area. And I'm talking about a few of the other plants we'll see on our field trips. I have mostly penstemon slides, but I have a few other slides as well. And yeah, let's just get going. See if this works. All right. It worked a minute ago. Do we need to advance? Yeah. Tap over here. There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so who's first time in Washington? Raise your hand. Got a few people. When you think about Washington is a very diverse state. Now we got the coast, Pacific Ocean, beaches and whatnot. We've got prairie areas in western Washington and the Palouse Prairie right here around Pullman. It's got the really interesting the channeled scablands area, which was carved out by the big Missoula floods way back when. But Washington is really mostly known for mountains, and we have several iconic mountain ranges and parks. Think of Washington, you think of Mount Rainier, it's the tallest mountain in the state. The North Cascades, which are kind of like a piece of Switzerland. The Olympic Mountains aren't super tall, but I mean, from rising up from the sea, they are actually pretty tall. Very scenic, lots of alpine, just beautiful mountain peaks. And then you've got the Blue Mountains. It's like, well, where are the mountains? And the blues are interesting because they're kind of flat actually on top. They are an uplift, but they're sort of mountains because the rivers sort of carved into this uplift. So it's definitely hilly, and there's big valleys and whatnot. But there's no, at least in the Washington part of the Blue Mountains, there's no alpine. There are no lakes. There's forest, but it doesn't have the same sort of grandeur as, say the Olympics or the Cascades. But it's still an interesting area, and I think you'll enjoy it when you're there.
Apologies.
So the Blue Mountains are not super tall. The highest point in the Washington part of the Blue Mountains, ironically, is called Oregon Butte. And it's 6,391 feet in elevation. It's the 45th highest peak in the state of Washington. So there's recently a really nice book, and I actually have a copy of my book back here about the Blue Mountains. It's done as kind of a fundraiser for the Blue Mountain Land Trust, I believe. And in the foreword, this fellow, Don Snow, has this great description of the blues. It says there's no towering drama on the horizon, no craggy peaks or snow-filled couloirs, no sense of the brow of God glowering over town. So it's not as sort of majestic as some of your more conventional mountain ranges in the state, but it still has a kind of a charm of its own. Outlined here is what's sort of considered the greater Blue Mountain ecoregion. You can see we just have a little tiny sliver of it in Washington. So the ecoregion is kind of centered on the Blues, the Wallowas, and into the Ochocos in Oregon. And ecoregions are kind of a way to parse out geography that's a little more ecologically based, or kind of combination of physiography and geology and the vegetation and flora. Some descriptions actually extend the Blue Mountains all the way into western Montana, but for our purposes, we'll limit it to this area. But as you can see, most of the Blue Mountains are actually in Oregon, so just a little bit in Washington. And the blue, you can see where a lot of the national forests are. So most of the Blue Mountains in Washington is part of the Umatilla National Forest. Here's another map just showing Washington for those of you who are more familiar. There's basically 9 different ecoregions in Washington. Most of them are based around mountains or basins. This is where we are. Here's Pullman, like right about there. So the Blue Mountains are this little piece down here. You could quibble about where the actual boundaries are. You might include this area as part of the Blues. The boundaries aren't, they kind of gradual at the edges. But most of the Blue Mountains in Washington are part of this uplift so it's a little bit higher than the surrounding sort of Columbia Basin area. You can see it's the smallest of the ecoregions in the state. And here, this is my only data slide to kind of put the Blue Mountains into perspective compared to the whole state. So the Blue Mountains, it's only about 1.2% of the land area of Washington, 566,000 acres. The total number of species that we know present are just over 1,000, 1,083, but that's, you're keeping score of the 9 ecoregions. The Blue Mountains come out last. It also has the fewest number of native taxa at 889, has the fewest number of introduced species, which I guess is a good thing. And as far as species of conservation concerned, tracked by the State Heritage Program, it's tied for last. There's only 45 species out of, here's sort of the state numbers, out of 369. What was interesting is when you look at how many species are unique to the Blue Mountains, and that's where the Blue Mountains do a little bit better. 41 species that only occur in the Blue Mountains within Washington, at least, not in the other ecoregions, which is actually 6th place. And from a conservation planning perspective, we think of, oh, we want to protect the most species we can, the highest species richness. But it's also important to identify and protect those species that are kind of falling through the cracks, that are kind of unique to an area, which is what people call beta diversity or complementarity. And so in that regard, the Blue Mountains are actually an important piece of the overall conservation network of the state. I don't have a map showing it, but a fair chunk of the Umatilla National Forest in the Blue Mountains in Washington is in a wilderness area, the Wennaha-Tucannon Wilderness. And it's one of the areas that's actually not that well botanized. Still a lot of things to discover. And we are still finding new species for the area. This is one that we just found last fall. Standing next to me there is Arnold Clifford, who some of you might know. He's a member of the Navajo Nation, a really good botanist for the Colorado Plateau. He and Arnold came up and gave a presentation last fall in our department, our seminar. Then he and I and my wife took a day off and went down the Snake River, where we're going to go on Monday, actually. And Arnold he likes collecting plants, so he's got a lot of plants there. I've got a bag myself. That's not my lunch. We're collecting stuff. And both of us, we're from the Southwest, and we saw this plant here growing in the sand along the Snake River. It's a winged pigweed. Some of you might know from the Midwest or the Southwest, Cycloloma atriplicifolium. It's a kind of like a chenopod down the Amaranthaceae, has these winged fruits, like a lot of sand dune species. We both recognized it, and although I was thinking, I don't see this in Washington much, and we both made a collection. I took a photo, I put it on iNaturalist, and when I loaded it up, I realized there's no photos from Washington of Cycloloma. So then I went into the SciNet database. Oh, there's no herbarium specimens from Washington. And I looked in the 2018 Flora of Washington. It says, oh, it's in Idaho. No records in Washington. So we actually got a state record on our trip. Now, what's interesting is, it's native in the Midwest. It's native in the Southwest. There's a collection just upstream near Hell's Canyon in Idaho. Is this introduced in Washington, or has it just been overlooked? And I tend to kind of wonder if it's just been overlooked. This is a thing that flowers in the fall. Professors are back in school, the students are back in school. It's kind of a ugly little plant. People ignore it. Seems perfectly reasonable that it might have been poking around on the Snake River undetected. Other people might think, well, it's kind of weedy. It's moved in. If it is a native, it's not the highest priority from a conservation point of view. It's probably doing just fine. But it does, begs that question of what is native or not. But anyway, there's more. We're always finding stuff. Maybe we'll find some new stuff. This is a shot of the snake, that same area where we'll go on Monday. And this is my only geology slide because Mark Derrick is in the audience. He's going to talk about tomorrow, so I have to steal a thunder. I'm going to give away one thing: a lot of basalt. There's other stuff going on. Take it for granted. And a little tiny piece of limestone. Very where the limestone came from. But most of the basalt, they're familiar with stone hotspot, continent moving to the west, but doesn't move. So it's Yellowstone nowadays, but gosh, 16 years, 17 million, something like that. Over this, and so there's this huge volcanism coming up. Modern analogs. There's some places in India, some places in Siberia, many other places have this much volcanic activity. And so you can see all these different layers. Each one's kind of a different flow, but that might have been like one day or one event. So thousands of basalt. So vegetation in the range, there's a really stark difference. You'll see down there, kind of north slopes and south slopes. Sides tend to have forests. There's actually found in the area. Grand fir is interesting because it's kind of a stuff in the blues is sort of hybridized with white fir, but the closest white fir is probably in Utah. Come that close. So large there was down here. I was thinking large being up kind of higher. That though with slopes, and there's a lot of meadow, at least loose grassland. Places where driving up a canyon, you'll see kind of an alternating slope, forest, south slope, meadow. And if you didn't know any better, you might think, oh my God, they clear cut, these meadows, but it's actually natural. I mean, there's cutting going on up there, but this patches of vegetation, in many cases, things. And the lower is a fair some of a lot of the fire the last two of changing the weed kind of specialized area range as well. Some places where there aren't trees, you get these specific plants. I'm really true with it's like more volcanic stuff coming, and there a few kind of specialized. Most people consider it Babe densifolia. Harold St. John, who ran the herbarium here back in the 19-teens, 20s, kind of a notorious splitter. He named this as Ceruleo montana. Anybody know what Ceruleo montana translates to from their Latin? Blue Mountains, right? There are actually several Ceruleo montana. I think whether it's a variety. These are also, if you know, really small, it's like just much more type plants in Bochra now, Bochra cascadensis, on these small, they kind of weather differently, different part of is relatively low in the Blue Mountains, besides it's big. There are does get snow, and but there are lake all on it's tributary to they're just wetlands. So there's this one area called Lime Hill, which is lime. It's a grunt to get in there. It's a long hike in. There's this one is Lime Hill. Some similar habitat across the river in Idaho. The only place in the world was Asotenensis, named for Asotin County, and Asotin will be going there tomorrow. It's kind of interesting. Here, this is kind of coiled legume stipe, central Washington. And there's actually several. There's like three The sotenensis is on. Look, right, goes up. People were out there looking for, right, kind of similar, and then they stopped this other one. It's a new species, only was named like 15 years ago or so. I'll talk about a few of the other plants. We'll look at there. Like cover 5 other plants, but there's so many cool plants. This one of my favorite plants, Brown's peony. One of the most peonies from China. It might be done flowering or it's kind of going into. The peony family is considered fairly ancestral with lineage. But here's the carpels. These really big anther flowers. Love these. The base of the flower, nectar. It's a really important. Anybody remember chemistry or biology or brownie? Brown actually was a botanist, but he's most famous as a microscopist. He was a botanist to use a microscope, invented seeing observations scope. He was a good botanist. This is one of my favorite plants, clustered Fraser gentian. The Fraser are Fraser specios. Fertig, for the keeping count. This is not loaded with bugs here. It. The cool plants like real flesh. Seeing this on the Blue Mountains. My favorite. It's from outer space. I saw the area for the hair, and I had a draft copy of the and they came this bottom and look at the range, and it's in Washington. I thought not a state for a plant that's tall, giant flowers. But I didn't realize I turned the page over. It was like the page break, and then it said Washington. so for about 3 minutes, I thought, I'm like, although I sort of knew I can't be the first person to find this. Of course, 20 first collected. Still a cool plant. This is Chiron. Anybody know what family this is? It's one of those. Yeah, it's in the Hypolaceae or now in the Boraginaceae. The like most borers or the scorpioid, sign inflorescence, individual flowers. Petals are all fused together. I think it's a carrot or rose, something like that. Bloom is probably done at some of the higher points. If there's been a little bit of late lying snow, might still be out. But, and the thing's only about that around. It's charismatic grow plant, very fleshy. Talking about this one too, the big appropriate Trifolia macro big cephalum head. These spikes of flower, 4 inches long. It's unusual too for a full, 3 leaves. This actually has splits or even. Blooms pretty early, but when it kind of keeps the flowers. They turn kind of orange actually or brown. They still up on the blues. It's a cool clover. Now I did this one actually for Mark's benefit. Mountains have This is one that's endemic to the Snake River. You can tell kind of serpent. On Monday, I might see some, but you got to. This one, the Oregon Pam solstice, or I should say, notice you, and they did a lot of kind of compare predictability and methods that they had at the time in this species account. We'll see some other illuminations. Their illumination where top it seems. One of my favorites are these little that flower about a quarter, a cat's ear type calicortus and sepals. And this plant's only like that big, at least in the Blue Mountains. Some of them making it a little bit bigger, like along the Selway. It's just kind of a cool one. Calicortus elegans, the elegant calicortus. And that's a kind of a local endemic to the, sort of southeast Washington, northeast Oregon, central Idaho, gets over to Montana. Just a really cute one. You'll definitely see some of that tomorrow or Sunday. And I'll throw out one other one. This is one that's another endemic. This is the white version of Calicortus macrocarpus, which usually is pink. It's pretty widespread in central Washington. The white one is only in the Blue Mountains and vicinity in Oregon and Idaho and Washington. This one's on the state rare list. People always say, why is this on the state rare list? Because I can see it along the highway. And when you go to Anatone, there's a whole bunch as you climb the hill. Yes, it's there. There's a fair amount of it. Most of the populations are fairly small. They're fairly scattered. One plant here, one over there. If we order the species, the 1 through 370 rarest in the state, this one's probably 362 or something. But it's still kind of a cool plant. And it's real pretty, fairly tall thing, pretty big size flower. For you cactus enthusiasts, we have this interesting cactus. It's considered to be a hybrid. Opuntia ex columbiana. It's a hybrid between Polyacantha, which occurs to the south, and Opuntia fragilis, which, if you know, has those little sausage-shaped pads. There are fragilis in the San Juan Islands, but it's mostly to the south too. Neither of these parent species are known from southeastern Washington today or along the Columbia. So at some point in the past, they got together, had a little candlelight dinner, a little berry white. They hybridize. Of course, Opuntias can spread vegetatively quite easily. Morphologically, it looks more like Polyacantha, other than the spines are a lot shorter, the pads are much smaller. The fragilis really comes more from the seed characters, some of the more technical things. But it's just kind of strange that another one of these hybrid things, sort of like the fir I mentioned earlier, where in the past they must have come together, but now their ranges don't overlap, and yet we have these hybrids. It's not all that uncommon. We'll see some of this at the petroglyph site on Monday. And then one of my favorites as an indicator for rare plants, I'm into rare plants, Balsamorhiza serrata. Not super common itself, although it's not generally considered a species of concern. But when you find it, you start to look around because there's going to be other cool stuff. It's probably passed at most of the sites by now. It flowers pretty early in the year. I took this photo probably at the end of April or early May, scouting out some places. But it grows in these places where there's a lot of cushion plants, kind of pretty windy, not much soil development. And so there's a whole suite of Blue Mountain endemics that like to grow with it. So whenever I see it, I start looking, because I look for Phlox solivega, I look for Erigeron, this Spherapilus, some other ones. So I like it for that. is endemic to the Blue Mountains. No one's found it yet, but it gets right. This was newspaper Mark Mayfield and Mark recognized that this was a new species. Like many new species, it was actually first collected in 1924. The collection, remember, okay, okay. A colleague of mine who worked for the forest, went to grad school with Marco, found it. I'm and telling me about it, and fortunately, some experts look thing. I think that's part of the reason people weren't April or May. It's called real woolly, kind of like what I look. Get a haircut. How traumatic that. It's not my whole section. It's one of these, fantastic cut. So you see, it's real woolly. Here's some fruit. It's not showing it quite so well in this picture. This picture I took in June, I think. It's up fairly high. Path. Flowering. I'm suggesting that Sunday. I won't Blue Mountain leading up, but where you can see this and some of these other balsam myriza, these other on your way forest. Anyway, it's got to be more species out there still to be discovered, which is what probably what makes exploring so. You all have been very patient. I appreciate it. Now we'll talk about some Penstemons. So Washington, decent variety of Penstemons. It's not Utah, it's not Nevada. Yeah, we've got 39 different taxa that are native, 30 full species, and then if you count varieties, it's 9. Quite a few of them are an endemic. I'll talk aren't in the Blue Mountains, but you guys are open-minded. This one's a really cool one. Barrett's beard tongue Barrett, who I looked up, forgotten, to a doctor in the D. Stickerler's book. And it's collected Herbarium, and they named it after her married name. It's a different. So it's Penstemon Barrett. It's endemic. Really small in total, and tends to grow on herbaceous tower way up high where you can't hardly see it. There's a couple spots where you can, and there's a garden of it off the highway on the other side. Bright, sometimes bluish. It's in that group, the anthers, and it's kind of two cultivations. It's kind of rare, but make a great garden or rock plant. Oh, yeah. If it this one, the sort of rediscovered not that long ago by some Penstemon Society folks in Oregon. Species was to river. There's one population in Washington where I took this picture on the Lacamas Prairie Natural Area run by the state. What's interesting about this is they call it tall Penstemon because it's really tall. It's like 4 feet, 5 feet tall. It was lumped in. Actually, Cronquist did this. It was recognized as a species. Keck named it in a Cronquist, who I off a piece. morphology, which people don't often have in those. And so if you top a bit like Penstemon rydbergii, other than Penstemon grows up in the mountain. And so in the Portland area, a few meadowy areas, Noel Holmgren looked at it and said, hey, this is a good species, and resurrected it. It's now actually a candidate for federal listing under the Endangered Species Act. It was interesting. I've only been to the Washington site, and Jesse Miller, who's the state botanist, now replaced me when I came here. He's doing a project on this right now, and Jesse lives in Portland. He's been to some of the Oregon sites, and then he visited Lacamas Prairie. And he said, this is actually the biggest population, the one in Washington. The Washington one's a little unusual in that it's actually in this kind of swampy white oak, Oregon ash kind of forest, and I just sort of assumed it used to be more open and had become more vegetated. And so it might be that is actually more the preferred habitat. And what's hard for surveying this is most of the land in that part of Washington is private, and so getting access to it is difficult. It's it's not the old days where you could knock on the doors. Hey, I'm going to look for rare plants on your property. People sometimes don't want to do that. Although interesting enough, this is an aside, I've actually never been turned down when I've talked to somebody face to face, a landowner. I get turned down on the phone all the time, but when they actually they sort of see you, it's like, oh, this guy, he's this hippie guy, he's okay. That as an aside. So anyway, this species, I was going to mention too, actually David Douglas knew about this. He collected it, talked about it in his field books, lost the specimens. So specimens were lost. Douglas, you'll recall, was traveling around collecting plants for his benefactors in Scotland. He was introducing new plants for cultivation, and so he would have been really interested in a 6 foot tall or 5 foot tall Penstemon. And he talks about it in his field books. And the collection site where he found it was the rapids of the Columbia River. Anybody know where that is today? It's under Bonneville Dam, and so that site was probably lost. So we don't really know how many other sites there might be. Jesse's working on trying to relocate some of this. So keep our fingers crossed that this might get some federal protection. And then one more non-Blue Mountain Penstemon. This is our only endemic Penstemon in Washington, appropriately enough named Penstemon washingtoniensis. It's only found in a fairly small area up in the North Cascades, kind of Chelan County, Okanagan County, if you're familiar with that area. It's very close to the Canadian border. It's got to be in Canada, but it apparently hasn't been found. I took this picture and collected it, not knowing what it was at the time, around Bergii. But it's very distinct. It keys out easily. Sort of quiescent is quite unusual. That has not they might take a second look. Small, as many of these Penstemons do. All right, Eastern Washington. Depending on who you trust, there are 9 species, the Blue Mountain. And include come out. This one to come out. Got this did it or Idaho. Oh, okay, maybe it's named for that. Oh, those leaves are off. Why not? That's why personally I prefer the snobby or anything, but I script out of the list. But so this one comes out pretty early. We'll see some at granite, maybe done. But for aficionados yourselves, so, 3 on granite salt as well. See it very high up in the mountain. Maybe as well, Penstemon venus. Mine, about ground and candidate that give anther, which is a little unusual here. This little fringe of Penstemon, a hot pink, purple. It's a real plant. It's about that later. Out now, it's kind of an early one. It's should be able to see tomorrow around Anatone Butte. The sawtooth bush penstemon. It's a variety of Penstemon fruticosus, very widespread, kind of shrubby species. Variety serratus is distinctive, has these serrated leaves, and the leaves are fairly small compared to like variety fruticosus, if you know that one. Or there's other varieties as well. I tend to see it on these really steep kind of canyony slopes. I always take a picture or collect some when I find it. It's a little bit underdocumented. Definitely, some of the places where I've seen it, I wouldn't want to take a crowd because I'm kind of scared going down these talus slopes anymore. But man assures me that there's some good spots right along the road tomorrow. So you don't have to kill yourself to see this. And this fruticosa is another one of those woolly anthered ones that Dasyanthera group. Another one of my favorites, I think I've said all these are my favorites so far. Penstemon glandulosus is a really cool one. It's fairly tall, real glandular stems. An early bloomer. I took this photo 3 weeks ago. Hopefully there's still some out. The trouble with glandulosus is deer really love it. They nip off the tops of the flower stalks, so you hardly ever see late in the year a nice big tall stalk. I don't know what it is about the glandular stuff. Maybe it's like gum or something for deer, but they just love this thing. And it's another one of these sort of northeast Oregon, southeast Washington, central Idaho endemics. It's got a cousin. And this is kind of a non sequitur, but this variety, glandulosus var chelanensis from Chelan County in central Washington, kind of grows on the hills along the Columbia River. So it's a little bit disjunct from the Blue Mountain stuff. Very similar, other than it doesn't have like the toothy leaves. Both of these, I think, would make great garden plants. I don't know if anybody grow glandulosus. Yeah, it seems like it's underused to me, but unless you don't want to chum deer into your yard or something, because they do love it. Oh yeah. Yeah, but it's pretty though. Yeah, Steve. Oh, okay. Oh, but we can enjoy it tomorrow in the field. Now this one I actually didn't think grew in the Blue Mountains, but I ran across this specimen. We're databasing our records, Penstemon rydbergii, and it's clearly from just west of Anatone, where you guys will be going. This might have been on some of the private land just below the forest boundary. I have to admit, I haven't really paid attention to this because I probably would have thought, oh, that's just attenuatus or a small one. It looks a bit like attenuatus, other than the flowers are a little bit smaller. And rydbergii is not glandular. But this record is good. It's legit. It's from 1926. If anybody does see it on the field trip, let me know. Take pictures. Yeah. Have you seen it in the blues? Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it at all. So, yeah. They're about the same size. Yeah. Flowers are definitely smaller, and this particular one's kind of young. They look like they're kind of clustered. They can sort of spread. But yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. I think red bird is common elsewhere. Um, I saw a lot in Utah and Wyoming, and but I have not seen it in the Blue Mountains myself. Here's attenuatus, and I don't know if you can see the glands if you look closely. I mean, it's just loaded with glands. Attenuatus is sort of the default penstemon in the Blue Mountains. If you see a penstemon, blue penstemon, you to identify, you just sort of start, okay, is it attenuatus? Oh, it's not. It's not glandular, so it might be something else. Super common on top. You'll definitely see a bunch of it tomorrow. This is the typical sort of blue phase of the plant, or purple. Definitely the most common one. But then there's this weird version that's on Kamiak butte. And I actually I was mistaken. I thought this was Confertus. And even, some of the early announcements for the trips said, oh, we'll see Penstemon confertus on Kamiak butte. And I was talking with Pam Brunsfeld, who shared this nice species list that she had made for Kamiak butte. And she had Penstemon attenuatus. I'm thinking, Pam knows what she's talking about, but I sure didn't see any blue attenuatus. And then I was looking through the D. Strickler book, and he's got a nice photo of the yellow attenuatus, and it can be yellow. And in fact, it's funny, on Kamiak butte, I haven't seen a single blue attenuatus. And the Blue Mountains, I've never seen a yellow one. I don't know, Mark, have you seen a yellow? Or Nan? I've never seen a yellow one in the blues. And what really intrigues me is, I mentioned St. John was a botanist here, big time splitter. He would have known about this on Kamiak butte, because that's where you take your class for the spring, flora. I'm amazed he never described it, or at least I haven't run across this being named as its own species or variety. It's out of character to let a pretty penstemon go undescribed. But other than the flower color, it looks just like the blue one, very glandular. So those of you going on the Kamiak, that of our target, a particular one. There are some reports from around down. I tend to prefer more to the west. It seems like somebody could describe Penstemon. We'll sort of put in variety D. Eustace. There's several varieties. This is the hot rock Penstemon on rock, sunny places. Tends to be kind of white or yellowish. Penstemon D. Eustace tends to have fairly wide leaves. It's really pretty. Just then localized almost entire. And then Blue Mountains is sort of in between these two. They narrow too, but narrow. And what's interesting is, and this is some fairly old work. It's actually in the 50, whatever, volume. They talk about early chromosome counts. D. Eustace is a diploid. This variabilis is a tetraploid. If the Blue Mountain things are kind of graphically intermediate between their two ranges, say it was a hybrid or something, potentially it could be a triploid, and maybe it's doubled, so it's a a hexaploid. To look at the genetics of these mountain populations, and just so yeah, it's mountain. Just any of you, not a lot of like, but child. I think it's fine. Patch. Before you get on the forest, there's some old concrete slabs and stuff. Park there. Whatever the other, or at least it was 3 weeks. Yeah, be going, but in the our, if you lay them out, these wide leaf Deustis, there's narrow toothy ones, and you got the other ones. They seem really distinct. So wants to go back to school, get a second degree. Learning, right? This one is a new one for me recently. Wilcoxia. This be good to look at the evidence. I think this can get mistaken for attention. It's fairly distinctive. It's lightly mid-sized flowers, basically kind of set on a toothy. Once you see it, it's pretty distinct. We'll be going to a place called Idler's Rest. The Palouse Land Trust owns by accident scope where to go, because I'm not really that familiar with Idaho. But I got there and I saw on the they have a bunch of trails, Penstemon Trail. So I thought over the place. So we might have to go up slightly higher than I was, but we should see some. It's kind of new. It's plant. So like 3 weeks ago, this was my new favorite. I've moved on, but so I'm going to say my favorite one for the last, the mountain Penstemon. Was at the academy, early expert on for the scroffs. Because all the things are no longer scroffs. It's endemic to the mountain, really on the Washington side. Really plant. It varies in color a little. Sometimes it's sort of sky blue. More one of those in that group where they don't open up across the connective. The two of you who know what I'm talking about or care. Distinct, although it looks a bit like speciosa. Hay, which I'm not that familiar with from Idaho and Montana. It's been suggested that it might have derived as a hybrid. Again, though, interesting that two ranges don't overlap today. And so, if that is true, at some point, their ranges have moved around. We think about plants, they really aren't. They're moving all the time. Look at the but it seems like a pretty good distinctive. Here's more. It's got a little bit town on it. I actually collected a photo and then collected this specimen. When I took the photo, I didn't know bee was in there, didn't hear it. I'm putting it, it's still inside. I was like, sorry, bee. Lots of plants there. One. This is along that west from nice path along the road. A fun place to go. This is another one on the state rare list. It's interesting, when you drive along, you see these patches along the road and you think, well, it must be, all over the place. But like so many penstemons, that's sort of like semi-disturbance. It does really well right on the road cut, and you go 3 feet into the forest, it's not there. So I think when people say, "Oh, it's everywhere," it's like, yeah. I mean, there are some meadows where it's quite locally abundant. To me, I look at more, how big is the range? How specialized is the habitat? I still think this is sort of a worthwhile sensitive species. Maybe not the highest priority, but it's still kind of a cool plant. And I'm going to close on a downer. The Blue Mountains, the typical threats that you see in so many places. Recreation, yahoos driving off the road, tree harvest, grazing, wildfire, more and more, competition from weeds. I should put that on there. But what's really interesting when you look at some of the climate information about the blues, I kind of circled it here. People are modeling what they predict will be the change in temperature from sort of current conditions, or sort of been the average for the last 50, 75 years. It's going to get warmer everywhere, but the degree to which it's getting warmer, I guess that's a semi-pun, it's going to get warmer in the west side a little bit. Central Washington's going to get a little bit warmer, but it's already kind of warm anyway. But the place in Washington that's going to get the most temperature increase is actually predicted to be the Blue Mountains. And so, it's already kind of in a rain shadow. It's not the snowiest forest. But this came up. I was working on when I was still a state botanist. I was doing a project looking at climate change impacts on rare species. It's called the climate change vulnerability index, and we got a bunch of these on the Natural Heritage Program website. And we use some of these maps, intersect the distributions with temperature, precip. There's like 27 different criteria that we look at. Some are environmental, some are more life history attributes about species. How well do they disperse? They pollinate or limited, so forth. What's sobering is that a lot of the Blue Mountain species that we look at actually come out ranking pretty vulnerable to climate change, and in large part because it seems like the Blue Mountains themselves are going to become a lot warmer than they are presently. And so relative to other places in Washington, it seems like the Blue Mountains may be impacted more than other places. Well, yeah. Where are they going to go? You can't go up. You can go north, but north is the Channel Scablands and the that's a good point. No place to run, no place to hide. So I'll actually finish on a better note. Here's our collection of Penstemons known from the Blue Mountains. I left off Rydbergii, probably because I didn't have a photo. But if you looked in your packet yet, you'll notice there's a little bingo card. I had this idea from Kathy from our field trip last weekend for the Native Plant Society. So everybody's card is different. So you can, when you're on the Blue Mountain trips, you can check off. If you're botany bingo, there's no prize or anything other than, if you're the first one to get it, you have a sense of personal satisfaction that you achieved this milestone and your neighbor did not. So that's all I have. If there's any questions.
Are there any questions?
Which one's your favorite?
I guess I am sort of partial to the Blue Mountain, the Pinellianas. I think, at least today on Friday. Yeah, ask me Monday. See.
Thank you, Walt.